Good afternoon, everyone. Hope everyone's doing well. Thank you for joining us today in our 2025 growth series. Happy to see so many people interested in growth by acquisition. Acquisition is near and dear to my heart. I spent 17 years growing a company from 5 to 120 schools, mainly by acquisition, and absolutely loved that part of the work that we did. So, thank you for joining. I'm Kathy Ligon, founder and CEO here at Hinge. I am very excited to introduce you guys to our guest speaker today. Our guest speaker is Alec Ligon. Hey, Alec. Thank you for joining us here. I'm going to ask you, Alec, to talk a little bit about your background that brought you to Hinge and your position as our current transaction team leader. So talk a little bit about your background and also the work that you do in that role.
Sure. Well, thank you very much. If you hear me refer to Kathy as mom, she is my mother. The fact that she is excited about me being here, she's a little biased, so don't hold that against her. My name's Alec Ligon. Like she mentioned, I am an attorney by trade. I used to be a prosecutor in Jersey City, New Jersey, prior to joining the Hinge team about 8 years ago. I initially started as an advisor here. I still work in that role. Our advisors, in a nutshell, we help people manage their exit, both from a preparatory standpoint, but also actually running the process for them when they ultimately go to sell. And I also am the transaction team leader, which means I'm over that entire team as a whole, and have been for almost 2 years now.
Alec, what is your favorite part of your role as the transaction team leader? What do you like best about it?
Wow. I should say working with family, shouldn't I? It's this industry, having not been in it for what I would consider to be a very long time, especially when you think about the decades and decades that a lot of operators spend in it. It's really a special industry to be in. The people who thrive and are successful in childcare and early ed are a different breed, honestly. I mean, it's not for the faint of heart, as all of you know, and it's truly special work. So I would just say, the most rewarding thing, I think, and I think you would hear this among all Hinge team members, is the ability to work with people in the industry that we greatly respect, and seeing their dreams come true from we opened this 20, 30, 40 years ago, not thinking that it would ever become what it was or be as fruitful as it was to us personally, but ultimately seeing a goal come to fruition and seeing them build something truly special and then ultimately receive the benefit of it when they exit. So I'd say that's probably the most rewarding thing for me.
One more question and we'll dive into our content. You and your team will run approximately how many selling transactions a year?
Yeah, good question. Ideally for us, we're doing 100, but I would say our team is built to handle anywhere from, I'd say 25 to 35 transactions annually. We would love to do more, and as we grow, we probably will, because we want to serve as many people as we can in this industry. But we're limited, right? We want to be able to give our people all the resources that we can. We treat every process the same, whether we're selling one school or 30 schools. So we have to make sure that we have the time and resources available to represent our clients as best we can. So anywhere from 25 to 30 in a calendar year is typically what we'll see.
Yeah, thank you for that. So Alec and team will run more transactions than any other advisory group. Annually, we invited Alec to be our expert speaker on the subject of growth by acquisition, because Alec is leading the team that's boots on the ground. We're in a very fast changing environment with buyers and sellers and process, and we wanted to be sure that we were giving you guys the very best, most up-to-date information as you consider growth by acquisition, and just to have his current knowledge as we present this. So we're going to dive into content. I invite you guys to say hello in the chat. We'd love to see who you are, where you are. I also would invite you to, at any moment, put your thoughts and questions in the chat as well. We will watch for those questions, and then we will leave 10 or 15 minutes at the end. Hopefully we got a jam-packed bit of content. I have a lot of questions for Alec. He seems sparky, so I think he's up for the task. But you guys put your questions in there, and we will certainly tackle those the best we can. So here's what we thought would be the best topics to discuss today. First of all, we want you to hear what we find successful in preparing for an acquisition. We want to talk about financing. I'll ask Alec some questions about current practices around financing. We want to pick his brain about where to best find opportunities. Where can you, as a person who's acquiring, find opportunities for acquisition? Then we want to talk about what's it worth when you're going to buy something. That's a big part of our work with sellers. It's very curated and very artistic, believe it or not. So we'll talk about that. Then especially we want to learn about what does a process look like today, so you can be prepared way in advance of opportunities to look at how you're going to accomplish that. And then we want to talk about the very important integration, meaning how do you actually take it over in a way that preserves what you've bought and builds on that. We want to talk about culture alignment, because that's more critical than people realize. And then we're also going to talk about how to preserve confidentiality as we go. I think that's on the slide, but not here. So let's get going with that. So the first place we want to go is, Alec, I made a list here of things that I believe that we have heard over time from people who are growing, because the first consideration is, do I even want to do that? It's not necessary, but most of our people with entrepreneurial spirits can't wait to do more, and they can't stand to see an opportunity they don't take advantage of. So talk us through these concepts and anything else that you can think of that you hear from people who are growing.
Yeah, happy to. So great initial question, right? Before we're even talking about growth, do I even want to do this? So initially, let's talk about the advantages. So economies of scale, that really refers to as your production grows, your cost on average per unit, per location, per child that you care for, ultimately is reduced. So, separate and apart from the value that you're bringing into your portfolio, you're also minimizing expenses on average across your entire portfolio, however many schools that you have. Specialization of staff. So, you can think about it this way: hire, your ability to specialize their current role, their what they do on a day-to-day basis, ultimately leading to higher productivity and efficiency for you. The possibility of acquiring great team members. I'll take this even further and say not only great team members, but great operational items from the new acquisition, right? So many times we see, a new acquisition come with a great director, or just fantastic teachers. But also not only the people, the operations as well. So always be considering, anything that new acquisition or new growth possibility for you, how it can change what you currently do from an ops standpoint as well to make what you currently do better. Fluctuations in individual sites. So as you continue to grow, your ability to add resources across your portfolio are greater, right? If you're operating one school now and an infant or a pre-K teacher calls out last minute, you may have a hard time filling that spot or having somebody to move into that room. If you have sister schools or additional schools close to your market, you might be able to fill that hole much easier, along with other things. But I would think they're just mainly the ability to share resources. More opportunities from team members. So we see this a lot with the buyer base that we sell to, which is typically a much larger operator. Your staff's ability to grow within a larger company is maximized, pretty greatly. Their ability to go from teacher to director to regional director and even beyond is pretty astounding in some cases. So as you grow, your team members' ability to also grow in their roles is an advantage. And then multiple exit strategies, right? So the bigger you are and the more valuable you are, the more opportunities and choices you'll have when you ultimately go to market and decide to sell yourself.
Yeah, also comes along with that at times some disadvantages, and you might have seen some that I thought about and maybe even others. Can you tell us about that?
Sure, yeah, and I'll try to flip these and make them advantages as well in some cases, but less control, right? We're all we're all micromanagers at heart. I feel like we like to have our finger on the pulse, but as you grow, it's just not an option anymore. The ability to delegate, the ability to hire people to do the nitty gritty work that you no longer have the time or ability to do across a larger platform, can take your control away. But I will say, when you're considering from that standpoint your exit plan, it's going to make you more valuable, right? So we coach our clients all the time to work their way out of a job. So the less that your company requires from you, the more valuable you're going to be to the next operator. So I think less control is a little bit nerve-wracking for some people, but if you do it correctly and you're hiring the right people, it's going to make you more valuable in the long term. And then less personal contact, right? I think a lot of people got into this industry for the contact with kids, with parents, with people in their markets, and you're probably going to see a reduction in that as you get a little bit bigger.
Awesome. Love the way you flip that into a positive. That was a good way to think about it for us control freaks. Let's go to preparation for growth. So I know that we really love for people to prepare way ahead of time, and I'm sure that you've seen some strategies that have worked well and maybe some that didn't work so well. But talk about these, and what things should our guests here be thinking about in preparation for acquisition?
Sure. Yeah. So the first one's super important, right? Make sure your current operations are maximized and stable. Your initial growth plan should always come from within if you haven't maximized growth from your current platform. I always tell clients to look at it this way: you're not going to build onto your house if you have a foundational issue, right? So you're gonna cover that first, and then you're gonna consider adding that man cave or that extra bedroom or what have you. So if your current portfolio does have some room for growth, I think that's the first place to look from a growth standpoint. But also, it really needs to be stable, right? If you're going to be sharing resources across a new acquisition and looking to move into a new market, you need to make sure what you currently have is stable and operating effectively. Develop a strong independent management team. So this kind of goes back to that less control. you need to have the people in place to take the load off of you, right? Your ability to handle maybe what you're currently doing in one school is going to change once you're at 2 to 3 to 4. So you need to have that team in place, and this kind of goes into the stability as well. Implementing systems to automate operations and marketing. So this is, pretty similar. You need to be able to speak between locations. You need to make sure that your marketing sound, that you're able to move into the new operation and grow it effectively and grow it similarly to how you've done your current operations. And then develop a team that includes an advisor, attorney, and CPA. So, advisors are important. They, lean on Hinge as an advisor, even when you're in growth mode. We are sell-side advisors, but we help clients grow for long term prior to helping them exit. Lean on us, right? We're happy to give you our 2 cents, or even speak with you as often as needed in order to ensure that we're supporting you as best we can as you grow. Attorney is important too, right? So this is, and there's nothing against litigators. I used to be one, but the brother-in-law who is a defense attorney is probably not your best support in an acquisition of a new child care center, right? You need somebody who has experience in both business and real estate, corporate development, and preferably someone who's worked on child care transactions before as well. There's a reason why we only operate in this space, and it's because it's a very niche market. It's unlike anything else. We're not selling 7-Elevens and yogurt shops here. Childcare is a much different animal. So having someone with contracts and acquisition experience on an attorney level, but also childcare acquisition experience is truly important. And then your CPA, right? And that kind of goes into a next point that I'd like to include here. Always be considering your own exit plan when you're looking at growth, right? We coach our clients all the time to, the day that you open your doors in your first center is the day you need to be thinking about your exit plan. Every decision that you make from a growth standpoint, whether that be internal or, an external acquisition, you need to have that thought in mind. And namely, from understanding your current value as it sits. It's very hard to understand your ability to be aggressive with growth if you don't know what your current value is, right? So lean on a team like Hinge, who does this for free, by the way. We do valuations for free all the time. It's really hard to understand your ability to acquire a new operation if you don't have a grasp for what your current worth is.
Yeah, I really like your last point, which was that any acquisition or any growth, I guess, for that matter, should make your total company more valuable, more attractive, really good point there.
Right. And we'll speak on this a little bit later, but you really need to have an understanding of, okay, if I went to market tomorrow and wanted to sell my schools, we would likely trade at X multiple. So my ability to acquire at a lower multiple than that, is ideal, because once it's in my portfolio or within my group, it's immediately more valuable than it is when I acquired it.
Oh, such a good point. I had not had that built into the content, but I'll ask that question again later. Really good.
All right.
Really good point. Okay, so we are going to today, of course, there are several different types of growth. And when we talk about growth, we talk about inside the 4 walls growth. We talk about partnerships with Head Start and public school. And we talk about brownfield development, which is basically the renovation of a building. We talk about greenfield, which is building from the ground up. You can think about that as building on the green grass, even if there's not grass there. That's what a greenfield is. But we're here specifically to talk about acquiring operating schools. So we talked about the advantages of growth in general. Can you talk us through these thoughts around specifically growth by acquisition of existing schools?
Sure. Right. So you're immediately acquiring cash flow, right? You're hopefully acquiring a business that makes money, right? So you're starting in the green, I guess is the best way to put it. You're also starting with a team, and you're starting with enrollment. You're starting with FF&E in a center. It's currently operating, so that's the obvious advantage, right? And then you're gaining new talent. I know we touched on this before. The ability to acquire a new team, new ideas, new people, and their ability to grow and improve on not only the current center or centers that they're operating in, but all centers across your entire platform. And then obviously the disadvantages in acquiring that, you're paying for it, right? So whereas you may move into a business that's not making money and have very little business value, ideally you're moving into one that does have value, but you're going to have to pay for it. And we'll talk a little bit more about what it's worth later. And then integrating cultures, so on the flip side of gaining new talent, there may be a culture issue that, it's hard to decipher prior to closing or transitioning the new center. There may be some growing pains, for the clients, or I'm sorry, the employees that you're acquiring as they transition into your current portfolio. So there's definitely some of that as well.
Yeah, thank you for that. Samantha has a great question about multiples. So Samantha, hang on to that for a couple more slides. We're going to specifically talk about that. All right, so let's talk about something super important. Where am I going to find the money for this growth? And this is very often a big barrier for companies that would like to grow bigger, to create more resources. What are the common strategies that companies go through when they acquire?
Sure. Yeah. I think everyone's first thought is, can I pay for this myself? Right. So personal savings, family, friends, investors that you trust, namely yourself, if you can be that. Capital partner for business and real estate. Your current company cash flow, if you're doing well enough, perhaps your current cash flow or bottom line is able to pay for a new acquisition. Possible credit line from a lender, maybe one you've used in the past. Landlord resources, so this is a really good one as you're moving into a new opportunity that does have real estate for sale. And then I'd say the most common one we see from the operators that we represent are your conventional, loan lending or SBA lending.
Terrific. And then later stage. So now I've got 4 or 5 schools, maybe even more. What are my options? So you talked early on about the benefits that go along with a more financially stable and valuable company with growth, but how else can our guests leverage their growth into financing?
Yeah, really good question. So for those who have this type of operation currently, multiple locations, and hold their own real estate, at some point you're probably going to get to the point where growth halts, right? It's just that you've gotten as far as you can personally, or maybe from personal lending, in order to take that next step, and you can leverage your current real estate ownership into future growth for your business, right? So whether that's partnering with a REIT, 1031, whatever that partner looks like, ultimately selling your real estate in order to do and perform the next business acquisition. And then, I alluded to this before, but a REIT partner, which is a real estate investment team or trust that they invest in real estate. And then a private equity partner for growth, right? So a lot of times we will take operators to market to find a private equity partner. This is a business investor who essentially partners with you. Will take a portion of your current business value, allow you to roll over equity into NewCo, whatever that looks like, and then fund future growth for you. Really, really love this opportunity for those people who have the EBITDA threshold that private equity requires, which is typically on the low end at about $2 million. Most we can get, we typically see private equity firms that will start looking at that threshold. 3 to 5 million are the other two sort of barriers for private equity interest. But really love this opportunity for childcare operators of that size, because it really it's a really private equity investors are not childcare operators, so they're still reliant on you to help them grow. But the funding is there. I'm sure we can all imagine how great it would be to have the funding that private equity typically has behind it, and your ability to grow in markets that you never maybe thought you could.
Yeah. So before we leave this topic, Christina also has a great question about multiples, which we'll get to. But let's speak to this. So we have private equity groups that you mentioned. We also have search fund groups who operate similarly, but there's some differences. And we have family offices. So Christina's question is, are we seeing alternative investment activity from family offices concurrent with PEs? And also how to filter out search funds versus an actual fund. So a fund that has ready cash. Maybe explain what a search fund is, and then talk about search fund, family office, private equity. Let's just give some definition to that.
Sure. Yeah. So to your initial question, which is a great one, I can tell you from a Hinge perspective, I probably have conversations with 3 to 5 new interested investors into childcare a week, maybe even more in some weeks. So the number of people interested in getting into this industry is as great or greater than it's ever been, and we don't see it slowing down. We really saw this post-COVID with the stability from the government in PPP funding, and the fact that childcare was looked at in a different light than it otherwise was prior to. It's an essential business, right? So with that came investors who saw the ability to invest in something special and something that lasts, right? Childcare is not going anywhere. As far as your specific question to search funders, I think the main difference there is typically they're looking to move in as the operator. So the difference in private equity versus a search funder is private equity is going to be largely hands off from an ops standpoint. Obviously, you would have to, from a growth standpoint, you would still have to get approval from a board or members of the private equity firm that are allocating the funds towards that growth. But largely from an ops standpoint, they're dependent on you as the operator in order to let them know, what's best for the operation and how best to grow. From a search funder standpoint, typically what they're looking to do is move in and operate on their own. They would actually move to your corporate location, wherever that may be, and operate the business themselves.
Yeah, and I guess, would it be true that family offices and private equity groups behave about the same way? It's kind of the same.
Really similar, yes. I would say the main thing with the family fund is whether or not the funds have been built up, right? We know private equity cash is there. Sometimes family funds may be in the works, so that's a question to ask. Obviously, anyone that you're speaking with there is
Right.
How much of the. Sorry, go ahead.
No.
I was done. Go ahead.
Oh, okay. Really good point now. Like whoever it is, you want to satisfy yourselves that they have the ability to purchase, and there's a lot of cash in the market wanting to be placed. So obviously, an investor with cash is less risky than an investor that needs to go and seek financing. So.
Right. And that's part of the benefit of selling to a larger company, whether they be private equity or private equity backed. It's one less hurdle that you have to go through from a process standpoint. The funding is secure already. Not only that, but they have tremendous amount of resources if they currently have a strategic group that they operate. And also they're quite good at transitioning. So they also pay more than most people would. So your value is typically more with a group like that versus a lower level operator.
And I guess you would probably say that if our guests here are acquiring, however, they can give comfort to an acquisition target that they have the ability,
Sure.
they either have the cash or they have the ability to get the cash, that probably makes their offer stronger. I guess just like buying a house.
Yeah, exactly like homes.
Okay. All right. Good. Thank you for that. All right. So, where do we typically see our operators go if they want to be proactive? So maybe the phone rings one day and somebody wants to sell to them. But if they want to be more proactive about it, where are the best places for them to look?
Sure. So I think the first one, shameless plug, is look to Hinge, right? I mean, you won't find any of our listings marketed publicly. We do everything direct, and that's for confidentiality purposes. But utilize Hinge. We have quite a robust list of buyers that we market to, and we're happy to have conversations. Like I mentioned, I have multiple a week. And get you in our buyer database and send you opportunities that are in markets of interest to you. Also, local brokers, right? I mean, as you grow from 1 to 2 and 2 to 3, you're probably not doing it across states, right? You're probably staying within your market or close to your market so you can justify that resource allocation and get to the new operation easily. So look at local brokers, right? Those are going to be the best resources for you to ensure that whatever it is that you're looking at or potentially acquiring is in a market that makes sense for you. Biz by Sell, great resource. Although I will say that from a confidentiality standpoint, it may not always be the best resource because it is marketed publicly. You can go online and see these listings, and anyone can. But it is a good resource because they do have a tremendous amount of opportunities there. Existing relationships. So, anyone in the industry, always let them know that you're in growth mode. It certainly never hurts that they know. You just never know when they may be speaking with someone who's looking to sell or want to sell themselves. Your current landlord, maybe he or she has another childcare tenant somewhere. Maybe he has a shell building somewhere that can be converted into a childcare center. You just never know. So let them know that you're in the market for growth. And then competitors, I really, really like this one. So, the operation that may not be a direct competitor, but is kind of on the outskirts of, where you are, really nice building that you've always kind of driven by and looked at and said, wow, I really, would love to have that in my portfolio. Knock on their door, and let them know, hey, I'm sure you're not ready now, but if you ever are interested in getting out, I love what you're doing with your center, and I would love to have a conversation.
Love that one. All right, I'm going to jump into the content where I think we have some guest interest. Let's talk about what it's worth. So this is always a hot topic of conversation. How do you evaluate what a business is worth? How do you evaluate what you can pay for it? What can you pay for or lease the real estate for? These are always questions. I think people get really influenced or triggered by the asking price. Talk to us theoretically first. I'm going to invest in a business and I'm potentially also going to buy the real estate or I'm going to lease it. How should I think about it theoretically before we get into the actual math? How, as an investor, how should I be thinking about that?
Yeah, well, I think the first step, which we already touched on a little bit, is understanding your own value, right? So, as you understand that, you're going to be able to make much more educated decisions from a growth standpoint. So that's key number one, is understanding your own value. As far as a business valuation, from a business valuation standpoint, it's almost entirely EBITDA based or cash flow based. So earnings before interest, taxes, depreciation, and amortization, along with some other adjustments that are possible. But in a nutshell, it's cash flow. And there is what we call a business multiple that is applied to that in order to, as it hits and as EBITDA hits certain thresholds, that multiple gets higher and higher and higher. So in a nutshell, that is how businesses are valued. There are other things that go along with it, right? A stable team, the market that you're in, private pay versus subsidy. But if you want to break it down to the basic level, it's an EBITDA calculation using business multiple.
Right. So Samantha had a great question about what is a business worth at a $2.5 million revenue.
Yeah, really great question. So, I mean, my first question to Samantha would be, is that a true EBITDA number, right? Because so often we see that, the bottom line that is showing up in a profit and loss statement and an adjusted EBITDA calculation are not the same thing. So, I would be mindful of that. My expectation for something, and again, I have no idea what the private pay to subsidy ratio is, or what market the operations are in. But my expectation for something in the 2.5 million range would be somewhere, but around an 8 multiple.
Right. And so Samantha's saying 2.5 million in revenue.
Oh, in total revenue.
Sorry. Yeah.
Okay. All right. I got you. So we would need to do that calculation. So, it's really hard to say, but I would expect something of that level if you're enrolled, and if you're enrolled to 75% of your license capacity plus, would be that your bottom line or your EBITDA is probably somewhere in the 15 to 20% of revenue range. So let's just say for ease of math, you're at $250,000. My expectation would be that you're probably trading in the 4.5 to 5.5 times range.
Yeah, can you give us a couple of the factors that influence the range? What are the factors that move you toward the top of the range?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, it's a few things, and I've already mentioned some of them, but there are certain internal factors such as are you heavily weighted private pay versus subsidy? I will say that post-COVID, subsidy and interest was improved. But you don't typically, from a buyer standpoint, want to see a large amount of revenue coming from one source of funding. So if you're 80+% subsidy, that could be an issue for buyers that may take you down to the lower end of the range. So private pay versus subsidy, whatever market it is that you're in, if it's in and around major cities, and I say the third big point is really buyer aggression, right? Does it make sense for them from an acquisition standpoint into their own personal portfolio?
Yeah, so I didn't have that question prepared, but you touched on it, so I'm going to take it a little step further. So talk a little bit about, I'm a small multi-site company, and I'm thinking about acquiring a single school. Talk about that arbitrage between what I can pay for that and how it's going to show up and support my total value. How is it going to work?
Yeah, so when I spit out these multiples, I'm talking from a national operator standpoint, right? So when I mentioned before 2.5 million in EBITDA, and apologies, Samantha, I thought that's what you were saying, was in the 8 multiple range. That's probably not what I would suggest you pay for it. This sort of goes back to what I mentioned from the beginning in understanding your own worth. You can understand your aggression towards growth much easier if you know, okay, if I went to market tomorrow, I would likely trade at a 5 times multiple. This opportunity that I have to purchase, which I really like, is asking for 6 times, right? Probably not the best move for me, right? Let that go to a bigger operator that's going to take it under their under their operation and trade it an 8 times. So that's one thing to consider, along with whether or not it's in a market that makes sense for you.
Great. We're going to jump into the formula because I can see where these guys are headed. They really want to know. I hope that means you guys have some actual acquisition opportunities you're considering. So we're going to jump there. But there's a question from Jessica. Jessica, we're going to get to real estate value. You're asking a question about land versus no land. Do you mean excess land, or do you mean purchasing the land versus a land lease? So pop that in the chat because we're going to get to that slide in about two more
One
slides.
more thing before you do that, assuming everyone in the chat does have acquisition opportunities, I really do mean this when I say lean on Hinge to support you in that. We do it for free, right? So we are happy to sign NDAs and give you our 2 cents on what you should pay for an opportunity. You'll see from a lot of these listings that, it may come from someone who's not familiar with the industry. So you may see asking prices that you're scratching your head on. Utilize us, right? We're happy to give you our opinion on acquisition, and it's totally confidential. Like I mentioned, we can sign non-disclosure agreements, and we're happy to support in any way.
Okay, awesome. All right. So I will preface this. I want you to talk us through how you get to the cash flow number, because you already said you don't just look at the financial statement and you look at that last number and you go, oh, okay, I'm going to multiply the multiple by that ending net income number. It's more nuanced, more artistic than that, because as you told us before, we want to know how much cash flow we can make on this business after we close. So there's a lot of curiosity around that. So talk us through the methodology. I also want to say that Alec on his team has 3 full-time people that do nothing but valuations, financial reviews, and quality of earnings processes, which he'll get into in a minute. So it's complicated, and this is a very simple framework. And I know I'm putting you on the spot by making you talk about it, because this just gives a little flavor of it. But kind of talk us through what your analysts do when they get a set of numbers, and then how do you think about it when you apply a value to it?
Yeah, so great question, and it's going to be way more nuanced than what I'm about to say. So, oftentimes you may see a financial statement from an operator, and the bottom line is showing in the negative or break even. That doesn't mean they're not valuable. It just means that they're probably paying themselves a lot, or maybe they're not valuable. But anyway, the first place to look is in the revenue basket, which is typically at the top of a profit and loss statement. It's going to give you your tuition, whether or not there are grants that are involved. If there's a subsidy component, you're going to see that broken down. So what are the revenue sources that are coming through? And along with the expenses, the main thing to be asking yourself is, does this convert to me, right? If I acquire this, does this revenue source, does this expense convert over once I take control, right? If you're asking yourself that question, you're going to be in a pretty good position to do this math for yourself. So the first thing you're going to start with are the revenue sources. As you'll see on the slide noted here, buyers should not and will not give credit for non-recurring income. So post-COVID, we saw this with PPP loans, other grant funding that may not convert to the new operator. So look at that first. What in this revenue bucket does not convert over to me or is non-recurring, right? So you cannot give credit for that as you're valuing a new acquisition. Make other expense adjustments based on your operation, right? So are they, if they own their own real estate, are they charging themselves rent? It's okay if they're not, but you have to input a fair market rent, right? Because you're either going to be paying rent to somebody else, or you're going to have to pay it in the form of yourself, or pay it to yourself later. You don't actually have to do that, but when you're considering the expense load, buildings aren't free. So inputting a fair market rent is necessary to get in there. Also, maybe your benefits are greater. So as you take control of this operation, your benefits numbers, expense may move up compared to where they are. Property taxes, other things like that. And then remove seller personal expenses. So we see it all the time. People run expenses out of their childcare businesses all the time. Not unusual at all. We're not the IRS. No big deal. But just make sure you uncover those things, right? If there was something that they do at the school, but also do at their house, the guy who cuts the grass at the school also cuts grass at their house, or there was a new roof put on their house at some point this year. Make sure you understand those and are removing them from the expense load. along with any other CapEx, right? So if there are one-time expenses that have happened to the school, a roof or an HVAC unit or something like that, and we understand it's not a one-time expense, but it's non-recurring, right? You're not going to replace the roof every couple of years. It's typically 20 years, and similar with HVAC units, so an expense like that can be added back. Because it won't necessarily convert to you once you take over as new owner. So that was a very high level way of getting you to that calculation, but you're going to come up with a number, right? And that number that you come up with, there are certain business multiple thresholds and ranges that you can use from there after understanding what your worth is as well. In order to make sure that whatever it is that you're offering for this new acquisition is something that makes sense for you.
Yeah, I love that. And I really love your point that you always want to purchase something at a lower multiple than your current multiple. So
Right.
Knowing your value, which is also something your team does, and knowing what your multiple is will then help you set a lower multiple. And I like what you said about if you're an 8 multiple and you purchase something for a 5 multiple, the second it enters your portfolio, it's worth an 8. So you just, gain 50% value in that acquisition. So that was a really good point. I'm going to jump over to, again, I know how complicated this is, so thank you for the simple math. It's a really deep analysis, and we have certain markers that the team works with there, and also on the real estate. So talk to us. So to answer Jessica's question about is it better to purchase a building with the land or without the land. So in our experience, Jessica, it's mandatory that you purchase. You can't typically buy a building without also purchasing the parcel that it sits on. The only time you wouldn't do that is when there's a land lease or that seller is willing to sell you the building with a land lease, and you're going to end up paying for it through the rent anyway. So it's like renting the land but owning the building. I mean, we prefer that you own both. Would you agree with that, Alec?
Oh, 100%. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So again, if I didn't quite get that correct or, understand your question, certainly pop it in again. But okay, so I know this comes up a lot that, you have a seller and the seller says, well, this is worth this because of this appraisal that I had, and this is worth this because of the building down the street that sold, which is true if the building's empty, right? But these guys are thinking about buying a building or leasing a building with a business sitting in it. So talk to us both theoretically about how they should think about that, and then what is the math?
Right. Yeah. So really, really good point. And we see people try to use comps and appraisals for valuing real estate. And to Mom's point, that's great if you're selling a dark building or one that doesn't have a business operating in it. But typically, as a landlord, if you're negotiating a 15-year lease with 5-year options to it, your ability to sell that building without the business sitting in it is extremely limited, at least for a few decades, right? So you can't really look at things like that when you're valuing real estate. There are two major factors that, and Mike Pepper from our team will kill me from breaking it down this basic, but there are two major factors that the REITs of the world look to when they're valuing a piece of property. One is the value of the tenant that's sitting in it, right? Their credit worthiness, their ability to pay rent. No landlord wants a tenant that can't support rent because you're just going to be looking for a new one in 6 months. So there's that. And the next is how much rent am I getting annually? So like I mentioned before, when you're looking to acquire an opportunity that contains both business and real estate assets, regardless of if the previous owner is charging themselves rent or paying a mortgage or whatever that may look like, you have to set a market rent in order to value the real estate. So what we do at Hinge is we use a benchmark, right? And it's going to be a little bit different depending on your market, the size of the school, what the business currently inside the building can support. But a decent rule of thumb is about 15% of revenue at 70% occupancy. If any of you have ever utilized our framework app on our website, it's a great tool for any benchmarking expense that you're interested in. I'm totally blanking on what the website is, but I know that people, we try to get it out there to people as much as we can. But
Kim,
it was
drop it in the comments for us.
There we go. Frameworkbyhinge.org. Boom. All right. So use that, especially as you're not only for yourself, but also for any acquisition opportunities, to get a decent idea as to what that market rent should look like. And then let's assume previous owner is not charging themselves rent. You have to put that expense in when you're calculating EBITDA, because no building comes for free. No landlord in the world is going to buy a building where there isn't rent that's coming to them. Also consider price per square foot. So this is really the only time that we look to market comps, right? You don't want to be so far over a price per square foot in your market that it doesn't make sense, regardless of how well or how poorly the business is doing. And then cash flow coverage. We usually like to see 2.25 times coverage minimum. Sometimes we can get away with 2 times coverage. What does that mean? Take your cash flow or EBITDA, add rent, and then divide by rent. And if it's more than 2.25 times, you're generally pretty good.
Awesome. And I realize again that you just very simply explained a difficult concept, which I love that you're offer to help people work their way through that. All right.
I'm going to hear from the analyst team tomorrow that I just.
Yeah, no, hopefully they're not watching. Yeah. They're too busy. They're too busy to watch. Okay. All right. Let's jump over to the buying process. I want you to talk us through the process. And we have been taking questions. We're happy to take more, but we're bumping up against y'all. If you've ever been with a webinar or one of our events, you know how like my type A person wants to start on the minute, stop on the minute, but we're going to go over a little bit because I want you guys to hear about the process and some things to think about. So Alec, here are some process steps. Just briefly talk us through.
Sure. Yeah. So we've already touched on the valuation part, right? That's A1, right? And I think, again, for the 4th time that we've sitting here, I think understanding the value of your current operation is step 1, and then valuing the current acquisition opportunity is step 2. Then, we touched on this before, begin securing your lending source if needed, right? If you're not coming out of pocket with this, you need to make sure that you have the funding available to even move forward with, whomever the seller is. Touring the school. So this is super important, right? You want to make sure there's cohesion, at least to some point, in your current operation and what the acquisition business is doing, right? You don't want it to be so far removed from one another that you're changing what works, or you're moving into an operation that you're not familiar with. Most of the time, sellers have an issue doing this during operation for confidentiality purposes. I love it when my clients are able to tour during operation, because I don't think you can get a really good grasp for whether or not true educating and learning is happening in a building unless you're able to see it. So whether, you can get in as a potential parent or, what have you, try to do that if you can. I'll say that in a Hinge listing, we do them after hours or weekends unless our client is open to it. And again, that's for confidentiality purposes. Next, you're going to present a letter of intent. So this is a non-binding agreement, high-level terms of the agreement that mainly include the purchase price, the time to close, how you're going to fund it, so on and so forth. It's a meeting of the minds, essentially, between buyer and seller as to what the agreement looks like at this point. Then you're going to move into the diligence phase, and I'm not going to touch on these last ones too much because we have slides on them. From there, there's both operational diligence and financial diligence. In conjunction with that, you're going to be negotiating legal agreements. So whether that be stock purchase agreement, asset purchase agreement, or a real estate purchase agreement, if real estate is involved. Once you have all of those check marked, you're going to start talking about announcements to both parents and staff. We do, typically work together on this from buyer and seller standpoint to make sure it's done properly. And then immediately after announcing, you begin the transition and relicensing period, and then closing. Yay!
Great on the major steps. I think we're going to dig a little deeper into diligence, and I realize that there are 2 slides here, so I wanted to be sure you agreed that these are the major components of diligence. We'll shoot these slides out to you guys, so we couldn't even, if we wanted to, talk through each of these. But Alec, talk about how to think about the diligence process, because I think it could, what's his intent, and it can get overwhelming too.
Sure. Yeah. So we actually have 2 members of our team that handle operational due diligence, along with a 3-person analyst team that handles financial due diligence. And it's for this exact reason, right? It's extremely daunting in some cases. A lot of things are typically asked from the buy side. Some of this, as you're looking to grow, is going to come from your partner investor source, right? Whether that be SBA or, if you're partnering with private equity and you get to that place, they're going to have their own diligence request list that they utilize in order to get themselves comfortable with the acquisition. From an operator standpoint, you need to have a good grasp on what the current business is operating under, what it looks like, what the staff looks like, what systems they use. And again, a lot of this is really just to ensure that what you think you can confirm, and then your ability to transition it later into your current portfolio.
Awesome. And page 2 of that's a lot.
Yeah, and then a lot of this is also going to go into licensing, right? So anything that licensing is going to require for your relicense, assuming you need to do that. Some states don't require that prior to closing, and I would suggest everyone look into the regulations in their own state to see what that looks like. We can also be a resource there if you're interested in knowing.
You mentioned, and I know this is way more complicated than just mentioning the types of legal agreements, but talk through the high-level process and what legal agreements might be a part of a transaction.
Sure. So from a business standpoint, there are typically 2 types of sales. There's an asset sale and a stock sale. They are basically what they sound like. In one, you're purchasing the assets of the current operation, and the other, you're purchasing the stock, right? So the major differences there is that liability can be transferred with stock. When you're buying an LLC or whatever it is currently operating under, the liability comes with it. So you need to make sure that you're indemnifying yourself in a stock purchase agreement to limiting the ability for someone to come back and sue you as to the time period after you close. So that's a really important one to work through with your attorney if you do decide to go stock sale. The area that you're most advantaged in using that is typically through licensing, maybe from a stock standpoint. And those are good questions for your CPA. So that's why people look to stock sales sometimes. And then the real estate purchase and sale agreement is pretty self-explanatory as well. And then obviously, if you're entering into a lease, really good point to consider here. You want to make sure if you're paying a high multiple for an operation and you're not buying the real estate, that you're entering into a long-term lease. So look at it this way: if you're buying something at 5 times EBITDA, but there's only 5 years left on the lease, in theory, you could be gone in 5 years and you just paid your entire profit for that 5-year period, right? So you want to caveat any of your offerings, if there isn't much time left on the lease, to your ability to negotiate a new long-term lease with the landlord.
I see now why you recommend a transaction attorney.
Yes, absolutely. Or just use Hinge.
Yeah, there you go. You touched on licensing a little bit. Anything to add here?
No, I don't think so. Again, I think it's so different from state to state. We operate all over the country, so chances are we close the transaction in your state. Use us as a resource, but also a lot of this is online, right? So, or reach out to your representative, that you may have a relationship with, and they can probably steer you in the right direction.
Great. And lastly, staff and parent announcements and confidentiality. You mentioned confidentiality in touring. This is a vulnerable area as well. So talk to us about when you want to announce, how do you do it, what makes for a good transition?
Yeah, so I will say at Hinge, we've come to find that announcing prior to close in some form or fashion is the best way of transitioning. If you wait and announce post closing, a lot of times people feel like they were left out. They feel betrayed in some cases. A lot of times staff feels like they're part of your family, and if you don't loop them into this process and they find out the same time as everyone else, they feel betrayed, right? And we've seen issues with transitions that way. Now, I'll say that, but you don't want a significant period of time between announcing and closing, right? So for all intents and purposes, diligence needs to be finalized. You need to have all sale agreements at least agreed to and completed. Don't necessarily have to be signed, but you need to have everything tied up before announcing to anyone. Typically between 2 weeks and maybe 5 or 6 days, somewhere in that frame of work, announcing to everyone. We've come to find that introducing the sale to leadership maybe a little bit before the rest of the staff can be beneficial, mainly because you want them on your team when you have that announcement. You want the calmness and the ability for other staff to ask them questions, whether that be your director, your regional, what have you. You want them in the loop and to be part of it, maybe a little bit before staff. So some really good practices that we've seen in the past is maybe announcing to director, assistant director on a Friday at dinner before announcing to the rest of parents and staff the following Monday. Right. And again, this is really just so that you're involving them in the process and you have that trickle down effect once you announce, because everyone's going to have questions, right? When you announce to parents and staff, everybody's first question is going to be, from a staff standpoint, is my pay changing? Well, first, do I have a job? Is my pay changing? And, who is this new operator that's coming in? How is my day-to-day going to look different? From a parent standpoint, it's going to be, does my tuition rate change and are my teachers leaving? And you need to have answers to all of those questions ready to go as soon as you announce, and you need to announce together, right? So typically what we see is our clients will schedule a meeting, have a normal employee meeting on, whatever day during the week it is, announce this sale to staff in that meeting, immediately send out a message to parents, and introduce the new operator at that meeting to answer any questions. The best operators that we've seen from a transition standpoint will then remain on during the week to answer follow-up questions, start onboarding the staff, meet and greet with the parents, and answer all those questions that I mentioned before that everyone is going to have.
Yeah, talk to us about the woohoo.
Yeah, unfortunately, in our case, when we go to sell things, it's very uncelebratory. It happens over, you're typically signing over DocuSign, and when the funds hit your account, that things have closed. But I think the main takeaway here is to make sure that those transition periods leading up to closing are good. I can say from a Hinge standpoint, we have never had a mass exodus of staff or parents or anything like that from the time of announcement to closing. And it's primarily because of the people that we work with, but it's also the prep that goes into it. So I think the most important thing at this conjuncture is making sure you are ready from a transition standpoint. You have those questions answered for parents and staff immediately upon announcing to them, and you're transparent about everything.
And there it is. Thank you, Alec. Thank you guys for going 10 minutes over with us, because again, We want to deliver you amazing information and respect your time. So thank you for the extra amount of time that you hung in here with me and Alec. That was just such a brief touch on some very complicated concepts for you to think about as you grow. Again, please use us as a resource. We're more than happy to support you as you look at opportunities and you want to grow. Reach out to Alec. He can rally his team around you and provide you with the information you need to make great decisions, and be sure that you're building value on what you've already created. So thank you, Alec. Appreciate that. Thank you guys for joining. Take care. See you soon.
Bye, everyone.